being recorded.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started, and people may trickle in, that's no problem. Want to remind you to not put us on hold if you get another call, just so people hear your beautiful music if you do. And please try to mute your phones in case there's some background noise. It won't interrupt our presentation, but feel free, to ask questions. Don't let the mute button keep you from doing that. So we will go ahead and get started. We're excited to have you all for Webinar 6. So we're almost finished with our formal program, which is very exciting. But we have a wonderful presentation today on coaching and leading change. And I'll hand it off to Greg, who's going to introduce our presenter.
All right. Welcome, everyone. And we're really thrilled to have Anne LaFave speaking today. As you can see on the slide, she's Associate Director of the North Carolina AHEC, but importantly, I guess for our group, she runs really all of their major quality improvement programs at the AHEC, and some of the ones you've heard about, like the Regional Extension Centers, or REC, which helps practices all over the state with meaningful use and health information technology implementation and things like that, and the Improving Performance in Practice Initiative, or IPIP it's called, that some of our local health departments participate in. And also, very relevant, I guess, to our call today, Anne is not only an improvement expert, but also an expert in coaching. And so that's one of her, I think, passionate topics that she's very well known for. She runs or helps run the coaching network for the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. Many of you have heard of that group, which is a very well-respected quality improvement organization for healthcare organizations. So anyway, we're just thrilled to have Anne's expertise to share with you all today. And not only all that, she's a lovely person and a great speaker. So it should be a great time with you all. So I'll turn it over to Anne now.
Oh, well, thank you, Greg. I was doing great until I had to live up to being a lovely person and a great speaker. I thought, oh, gosh. But thank you. Thank you for having me here today. As Greg was saying, this topic of coaching is near and dear to my heart. It's something that we rely on entirely in our program, and it's no small task. Coaching change, which is really what I'm going to call this today, is heavy lifting, and I would argue that every one of you, including myself, every one of us out there is doing it. And so I've tried to alter my slides, which is much easier than altering my speech, to kind of talk about things in teams instead of in practices, but I'll give a little disclaimer up front. What I'm used to doing is talking with groups either within my own program, so coaches that we've hired in our program to go out and work with various, in different parts of our program. In the HIT part of our program, we're coaching 1,100 community-based practices to adopt and implement electronic health records. And some of those practices then have continued on or continue on to work with us in improving performance in practice work or clinical outcomes improvement, where we're coaching several hundred practices over the years in how then to use that technology and really embed some solid systems in there to improve health outcomes in their patient population. And then that leads to patient-centered medical home and those other programs. So that's kind of my, that's my everyday thing, and that's where I'm coming from. So when I talk about coaching, it's often about coaching practices, and it's often with people who are really paid to go out and coach. But that's not to say that it's really any different than the rest of us are doing all day, in that if you're trying to encourage others to engage in quality improvement activities, you're coaching. So I thought that was kind of the place that I would come at it for our talk today, knowing that a lot of you on here are probably leaders in organizations or work with leaders in organizations to try to make change that will result in an improvement. And so you may wear multiple hats, but the hat we're going to be talking about today is when you're coaching. So these are the objectives for today, and I hope that we can meet them, or you can tell me later on if we're meeting them or not. But what I hope to share is some specific methods for coaching teams within your agency. And again, the methods aren't anything new, but maybe some self-reflection on what we're doing and how we really do this and how do we fit it to our own personalities. And then recognizing the attitudes that are needed or that are used to promote rescuing behaviors in coaching, and then to specify ways to coach that will build responsibility in target environments. And so that's a little jargony. I just realized it right now, but we'll see if it makes sense when we get to the end. So just to start out, when I say coach, so you can go into book after book after book or seminar after seminar and get multiple different versions of, well, coaching means this and definition of coaching. But today I'm going to use coaching as a verb, not as a noun. It will be a noun too because I kind of move it all over the place. But when we're talking about it today, it doesn't have to be in your title. Let's talk about it as a verb, to coach. And so that we're really talking about, training intensively or, using instruction and demonstration and coaching in that way. And then I thought this was funny as I was looking at things, just for a little chuckle. Some of these related words were, to direct, okay, that sounds good. Engineer, steer, sway, accompany, attend, chaperone, escort, oversee, superintend, supervise, drill, train, brief, enlighten, inform, instruct, school, teach, tutor, indoctrinate, cultivate, foster, nurture. I also thought we could have, hand-holding, tear drying, blood, sweat, and tears, that in there because I felt like, oh, yeah, that's all coaching. That's what we do. So it just gave me a little chuckle to see all those words. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about today is this very simple little model that really I can explain in about 2 minutes. But then if you sit back and really think about it, it starts to really sink in and you scratch your head about it. So kind of like the model for improvement, so easy to understand, and then when you go to actually implement it, it becomes quite complex. And that's what I feel about this little model. So my colleague Neil Baker at IHI and myself developed this model as we were talking one day about, well, how do you know what to do when you get there? So, if for my case, if I'm coaching a practice and, I go in today, I have a meeting with them, we have an agenda for our meeting, I'm all set up exactly how textbook style you're supposed to do this, how do you decide what to do when you get there? I was saying, well, it's kind of a shot from the hip and, you have to be real nimble and move around on your feet. And after we talked about it for a while, I thought, I don't think I'm doing this very well. I thought, I think this can be done better. And I think it's because I'm not really, while I have an agenda and I have goals for this practice and I know what goals I want this practice to do. The practice is the one that chooses its own PDSA cycles, and I'll work with them on what they choose to do and those types of things. But have I really thought about what I'm doing while I'm in this practice today? And that's when we started to come up with these circles up on top, or I'm going to call them bubbles. And so we started to really look at when you're in a practice or coaching anything, so when you're in a team meeting and you're coaching your team, are you really thinking about the skill set that you're using to get that team where they're going today? And so let me just walk us through this a little bit, and then I'll explain how it applied to what I was doing. And so at the far left of your screen, it's basically doing tasks for the team. This used to be real common when we had to use registries or when we had to populate registries to do quality improvement. One of the methodologies was just go in there and, on, several nights and weekends and, I could get this populated for them and I wouldn't have to ask anyone in the practice to do it. So you can sometimes drop back and actually do things for the team. And then, we said, well, there's some facilitating, and so you could facilitate meetings. You could, help facilitate how, they're going to interact with other forms of leadership within the organization, those types of things. Consulting is really when I'm coming into this practice and I have all the answers. That's kind of what a consultant does is, when a question is asked and an answer needs to be given, that's more the consulting. And then training, how to take a good blood pressure, what is the model for improvement, that's training. And then we started to think, coaching. Now, coaching, I as a coach need all of these behaviors. But then we talked about, well, if you're going to coach something new, if I want to coach someone on how to lead a good team meeting, then I could do it I could facilitate the meeting myself and show them how to do that. That would be modeling it, but I'd be facilitating for them. Coaching is more working with them ahead of time, getting them ready for it, letting them do it, sitting in the back of the room, watching, and then afterwards following up and really seeing how did it go, what happened with it. If you're going to coach the model for improvement, you may not even have to be at the meeting. You just want to follow up and make sure, what are your PDSA cycles? Did you make your projections? Did you document those projections so you have them? And, so you can coach them along through it. So we started to think about these different behaviors, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that, wow, I facilitate a lot. I would argue that I facilitate all over the place. And I don't even think I was really realizing it until I realized that I didn't use all of these other behaviors as much as I could have to really get us where we need to go. And then we started to look at these things and said, I think that there's a progression of these so that if a practice or if your team is in a project mentality, so now I'm looking down at the boxes. You have this big arrow and then the boxes underneath. If your teams are in a project mentality of, well, they told us we had to get an EHR, so we're going to get an EHR, and we're going to put this in, and it's going to be a lot of work, and we're going to do all these things, but then it's done, and we're not going to do anything after that. Then that's very much a project-minded mentality. If we're going to work for 3 months on improving, patient education, then we're going to work for 3 months on it, and at the end of 3 months, we're going to stop doing it. And unfortunately, we still have a lot of project-minded stuff out there. So basically, the project-minded work falls towards, in this model, falls to the left-hand side. And so when you coach in that type of an environment, there is sometimes, a lot of times, you can work and you can just simply, so if we're going to work to improve patient education, maybe we're looking for new pamphlets and posters to hang up, and, do I need to really coach a team on how to look for pamphlets and posters, or if this is a one-shot deal, I can just go pick them out and bring them into the practice. And so sometimes it's just a matter of doing it and getting it done. But what we found was that if we really wanted a practice to be more transformational, meaning that they really are, that the team or the practice is really owning the process and they want to change, if we want to empower them to get things done on their own and learn how to do it so that they can be transformational, which means always transforming, we really needed to work to the right-hand side of the spectrum. And so it really doesn't help me to go in and do things for this practice. It helps this practice if I go in and use these skill sets in these bubbles to get them where they need to go. So I started to look at this and thought, oh my gosh, I've been defaulting to facilitating for years just simply because that's my comfort zone. I'm very comfortable. If any of you know me, I don't even have to know you or your meeting. I'll come in and facilitate it for you. While, that's an okay skill to have, I wasn't really thinking about these other things and how I could really effectively use them. And once I was able to start to change those around a little bit, it really made, and like I said, you can do this in coaching anything. You can do this in raising your children. Sometimes you facilitate with your children. Sometimes you simply do it for them. Sometimes you give them the answers, but sometimes you really coach them along. And so this is just a matter of leading change and coaching change, and how do you do this? So it became pretty exciting. We've taught this now for about 3 years in our coaching program at IHI. And again, it's not like it's anything earth-shattering in the model, but it does cause you to stop and think about what you do. And so now I will try to facilitate less. Now, there are still some very appropriate times for me to facilitate, and it comes in handy because I really like doing it. But there are some times when I can really bump it up a notch and teach someone else how to facilitate and coach them through it, or coach someone else on how to work in those PDSA cycles and those types of things. And then, therefore, I'm really handing over the baton, where before all I was doing was modeling the behavior that I wanted them to continue, but I kept doing it for them. So, I know, let me stop for a minute. Is this making sense? Are we resonating with anyone out there? Yes, that makes sense to me. Okay, thank you for jumping in there.
You're welcome. We're getting some chat saying yes as well.
Oh, good, good. So one of the things, so in looking at this model, I thought we might take just a few minutes and kind of look at it and say, you know, take a minute and think about which one of these bubbles do you default to when you're working with your teams. And, you know, it's kind of like your go-to bubble. And so, like, for me, like I said, it was facilitating. I will tell you the one that I probably avoid more than any other is probably the training piece, and probably not why you would think, in that I like to train. I just like to train once. I'm not a good person to be your consistent trainer because I keep changing things. And so, you know, but I think as the bubbles go through, it's different. Now, I will tell you, my colleague Neil, who developed this model with me, he defaults to consulting. He's a physician, and he gets paid to go into practices, and he says that he feels a tremendous amount of pressure when he goes into a practice to coach a team, that between being a physician leader and getting paid under a private contract, he said that his default bubble is that consulting one where he feels pressure to have all the answers. And so I think it was funny for us to compare our two behaviors and find that we're very different in how we use it. So does anyone want to kind of speak up and tell what they think their default bubble might be?
Hi, this is Dot McNeil in Cumberland County.
Mm-hmm.
I think my best or my strongest skill would be coaching.
That's great. And so how do you generally tend to do that?
I just find that it's easier to coach people into a set behavior or a desired behavior. Training would probably be my next one, but coaching, I think, goes to the heart of the matter and helps you to help them realize that they are capable of doing anything that they put their minds to.
I think that's great, and I'm so happy that, and lucky you, that that's your go-to one, because I do think that that's a very empowering bubble. So I think that that's great. What about others? Do you all have default bubbles?
Yeah. Hi, this is Drew up in New York State. I'd have to say for the most part, I guess my default bubble would fall somewhere in between facilitating and consulting. And I think most of the reason for that is a lot of the interactions I have with customers, for lack of a better term, or colleagues, there's not necessarily a set agenda or objective for what we're trying to do. Somebody's got an issue, and we're trying to, figure out how best to address it. So it's more of a consultation role, and they do expect me often to have answers to questions where I don't necessarily have the subject matter expertise of their business. So probably mostly consulting based on your kind of definitions here.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, and it sounds like in the situation you described, that's very needed. You know what I mean? So that might be exactly perfect. So there is no one right or wrong bubble. There's plenty of situations where, you know, I can be very strong in the coaching bubble, but still need to sit down and just simply do something for a practice. And so I think, you know, there are times that it's very appropriate to do any one of those bubbles.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think what I find, you know, it starts off as a consultation, but given my improvement background, and you know, if you're approaching issues from an improvement mindset, it can end up in a coaching discussion. So helping them to really identify what their issue is and then approach it from an improvement methodology. So it moves from consulting to kind of coaching in one conversation potentially.
Yeah, I think it can.
It works well.
In any visit, it could move all into several different. Maybe all of them. It might be a little schizophrenic there, but yeah, I think that it can definitely morph from one area into another and those types of things. I think what I've found most useful in developing this quirky little model here is that I think the key thing that it does for me is it makes me think about it. Which is probably the simply best thing to do with it, is, you know, okay, I'm facilitating again. Is facilitating the best thing that I can do for this practice right now, or should I be handling this in a different way? And a lot of times the answer is, you know, yes, what you jumped to is fine. It's the right way to do this. But yeah, so Jen is on the chat saying, you know, it helps you to be more intentional, and yeah, I think that's really all it's intended to do. And then I think if you put on, if you also look at, I do think that, you know, keeping in mind that some of these that are at the, you know, more right-hand side are much more of the empowering the practice and the teams, you know, to really get into and own the process. I think that's helpful to keep in mind. But even in a really proactive transformational team, sometimes they really could use me to just do something. And in our program, I often talk, you know, and we have these coaches out all over the state, and they're fabulous. And, you know, I joke and say, you know, we'll do just about anything in our program to get practices what they need and moving along the way, but we won't do anything. But, you know, if a physician needs me to walk his dog, well, he goes ahead and, you know, completes this data and sends it in, then I'll go walk his dog, you know. So it's, you know, you really have to do a give and take. There's a lot of rapport building on the left-hand side of this. So some of these left-hand bubbles, there's the doing for, the facilitating, the consulting, those are very rapport-building bubbles, and you don't want to skip over them, that's for sure. But I do think you'd have to be intentional in your choices of what you're doing today and understanding that the bubbles over to the right may lead to more empowerment for the practice. So, well, great. That was a great piece. I'm going to move on, but I'm hoping maybe we can tie this into some of the next discussion that we're going to have about change. So now we've talked about being coaches and applying that as coaching change. We have to talk a little bit about change, and you all know a ton about change. But I think we kind of need to set it up in Ann's frame of change so that it ties together and makes sense. But so truly, crisis is needed to create change. Some people don't like the word crisis. It's too harsh. You know, they don't like to even say that word. Those types of things. It makes it sound negative. Crisis is negative to some people, but there's definitely, you know, things can't feel good. You know, things can't feel normal in change. Otherwise, it's not change. You know, I cringe when a provider will tell me, you know, we got a PCMH and I really didn't feel it. You know, I didn't feel a thing. yeah, that really bothers me because that means there was no change. That means nothing changed. Change creates some, levels of anxiety and different feelings. Even if you love change, I'm a strange kind of person who really likes change. You can ask anyone who works with me. It drives them crazy. But that doesn't mean I don't have some level of anxiety over it. It just means that I don't shy away from that. I enjoy that level of anxiety. But, so if you have someone who's saying, oh, our practice did this big change and we never even noticed a thing, then I would argue nothing has changed. Because you have to have some sort of crisis in order for change to occur. And so then, that crisis has to then create some sort of anxiety. Again, anxiety is not a negative term. It just has to create that feeling in order for there to be a reaction to that crisis. Now, what I see out in the practices that we work with is there's a difference between acute anxiety over change and chronic anxiety over change. And in my opinion, what we really want for effective change is acute anxiety, which is hard to think about it that way. But that's really what we want. So when I say acute anxiety, we're looking at, acute anxiety can be a real motivator. Like, ooh, this doesn't feel good right now. Let's work on this and get through it and make it better. It can make people kind of join in and jump on this. It can create a results-oriented attitude. EHR implementation is a good example of that. You can't go through an EHR implementation in a practice without a whole bunch of upheaval and a whole bunch of anxiety and those types of things. But, boy, you feel it on the other end when you start to come out of that tunnel, and it's not on your go-live day, that's for sure, but when you start to come out of that tunnel, you really have a result. You now are an electronic practice. You still, and it may be 3 months later, it may be 6 months later, it's different for every practice, but you definitely get to a point where everybody on the team can agree that it is better. Okay, we've now gotten to better. Not best, not perfect, but we've gotten to better. So it can help, acute anxiety can help everybody kind of rally around getting there. Interesting, acute anxiety can really bring out the best in people. And, we see this all the time with, first responders. We see this all the time with, something happens and people really jump in and help out. That can really happen in your teams and in your clinics of, okay, we now have been told by our county commissioners that we have to do this. That can be a rally cry, and it really can help bring people together. Unfortunately, acute anxiety can also bring out the worst in people, and it needs to be watched because you certainly don't want it to push people over the edge, and it can. You have to kind of watch for meltdowns and things like that. But, that's what acute anxiety in response to change can be. The ones that I really worry about are what I would call those healthcare teams or practices that operate in chronic anxiety. Those where I walk in the practice and you name it, because I've been in hundreds of practices, so you name it, and if I'm walking into your practice manager's office and I have to move the payroll checks to sit down because there's nowhere else for me to sit in this office, we're looking at maybe some chronic anxiety there. And so anytime a practice says, but we're used to working in chaos, that's chronic anxiety, and it wears on the staff. It really wears them out. It creates a lot of self-doubt because it's like this disequilibrium. People don't know what good feels like any longer because we have been in this state of chaos for too long. We have chronic anxiety. And the other thing that I think is interesting and almost counterintuitive is chronic anxiety can create an unwillingness to change. And that's because all we've had is this chronic anxiety going on and never a really good experience with change. They don't ever come out of that tunnel. And so you're always in this tunnel of anxiety happening over and over, and you don't get to experience what it feels like as a team looking back saying, yes, we did this, because you're in this constant chronic flux. So I just think that it's a really good way to look at change. It's a way to help healthcare teams understand that if this is feeling uncomfortable, let's assess this uncomfortableness. Is it acute or is it chronic? We want to keep it in the acute stage, even if it's uncomfortable. But my argument is it has to be uncomfortable. Let's keep it acute. So the next model that I wanted to talk about with this and thinking about your role in coaching change and knowing that change has to have a level of discomfort to it. I wanted to talk about Mary Beth O'Neill's rescue versus responsibility model. And what we really want, and this is from her book, and I have at my last slide today, I think I have some of these resources if people want the books. But Mary Beth O'Neill has this great model out there, and it's really just, again, to get us to think about our own actions in coaching and leading change. And this rescue model is something that I think a lot of people in healthcare do. And actually, Mary Beth O'Neill is from the organizational development world. She's from high-level business consulting world. Not maybe healthcare, but only in, big Fortune 500 company type healthcare. She's a business-minded person, and I would argue that the more and more I think about this model, I think those of us who work in healthcare are really prone to rescuing. We have to be really, really careful about this, and so let's walk through this and see if you agree with me. So Mary Beth O'Neill says that attitudes that support rescuing when coaching is that the coach thinks the team cannot do it on their own, meaning that they cannot do it without me. If I wasn't here today, they wouldn't even be meeting, or they wouldn't be moving this along. Other attitudes that support rescuing is that the coach oversees how the team does things in case they may blow it. This is a perfect example. So like if your team is starting to develop their PDSAs, so you've already gone through and decided, how you'll know that change is an improvement, and if you're starting to move on and say, okay, well, what changes will result in an improvement? Your ability to drop back and coach how to pick a PDSA versus telling them which PDSA to pick is a good indication that you might be rescuing. And for me, this is because we go into practices and we'll coach practice after practice after practice. Some of that is just the practice learning how to use the model for improvement. So I will tell you that foot exam posters don't work. Okay, but I will tell you that as soon as I get a practice with diabetes and they have to improve foot exams, what's the first thing they want to do? They want to put a foot exam poster up in every room. Okay, and then what happens, it's even worse, they'll get a little blip in their foot exam data, and that's because the posters are new and everybody responds to them and then everybody's jazzed about them. But what happens 3 or 4 months later is those posters are now basically a part of the wallpaper and nobody really pays attention to them anymore and they don't work, or they're not sustainable change anyways. And so the hard thing as a coach is I know that, but that's part of the learning process. And if I'm going to help this practice, if I'm going to coach this practice on learning how to embed the model for improvement in their program, if I'm going to help them really trust the model for improvement and reflect in their data and those types of things, then I have to be willing to oversee, what they're doing. I have to be willing to coach what they're doing, but I have to be able to let them make their own choices. And sometimes that's really hard to do. And then this last one is this attitude of the coach feels the need to do things for the team because he or she has the expertise. So me going in there and telling them foot exam posters won't work is absolutely me rescuing this practice. And And so some of the behaviors that support this, these are just some of those, self-check type behaviors. If you think you're in here coaching this team and you start to take up more airtime than anyone else, then you're not coaching. Now, you might have dropped into that consulting role, and as a coach you're going to consult today, and that's fine, but you have to watch your behaviors. Are you rescuing? Is consulting the best thing for you to do today? As the other behaviors are the coach makes decisions for the practice, client, and team. This might be hard for a lot of you all in that I think you'll be coaching, or you are coaching change and improvement in the same organization where you work, and you may be a leader. So, you'll just have to decide, are you making this decision because you're a coach who's rescuing this team, or are you making this decision because you're a leader and it's your executive decision to make? I think distinguishing between those is good, and you just have to make sure that you're in the right place in the right moment. So, and then the other behavior is that the coach gives more answers than offering clarifying questions. If we're truly there as coaching change, offering those clarifying questions is really important. I find even if you're consulting, and I think it was Drew who just said that he's often in that consulting mode, but they ask him questions that he doesn't have the answers to, and that's where clarifying questions can really help in that. But if you're quick to jump in there with the answers instead of trying to get more information, you may find that you're rescuing the practice. And so,
it's funny. I keep a quote on my my whiteboard. This is Drew again. Sorry, and it says, "If you have something to say, don't until you know what you want its effect to be." So it's like it kind of goes along this. It's you can always. I've found that it's easy to get in trouble by saying too much, but it's hard to get in trouble by saying too little.
That's absolutely right, and a lot of this is personality too, right? So you have to kind of put your own coaching personality into this. Again, if you know me or worked with me before, I like to talk. I'm a chatty Cathy. There's no question about that. For my entire life, my mother has said, "There's a reason God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, Ann." But I think that that's a lot to bring in. So now we're saying, okay, I have to be intentional about what style I'm going to, what is the skill set I'm going to bring into this practice today. And then I have to watch my personality and see if I'm rescuing this practice. But I think it's all part of what we're doing, and it's what makes coaching very difficult. So this is just a picture of what Mary Beth O'Neill is saying in her model. Is she's saying that basically, if you're down here as the coach, if the team is giving you their challenge and you're taking it on down here as the coach, then basically that team has a secondary relationship with their challenge. And I think that's, all of a sudden when I start to think about that, I'm like, oh, that's right. If I'm home and I can't sleep tonight, and I can't sleep tonight because what is going to happen to this practice if they can't get this together? That's a much different feeling than I can't sleep tonight because I can't think of a way to help this practice handle this challenge. Those are two different, now, equal loss of sleep probably, but, if I'm sitting home thinking of ways to manage that team's challenge, then I'm definitely rescuing. If I'm sitting at home thinking of ways that I can motivate that team to meet their challenge, then I'm not. And so I think it's just, again, a really easy, so really what then Mary Beth O'Neill goes into the responsibility model, which is something I think we all need to aspire to, which basically means the team owns their own challenge. Your organization gave you 6 months to meet patient-centered medical home. I don't think that that's nearly enough time. I'll coach you and help you on what we can, and I think we'll make the changes that we need to make. But this timeline, this pressure, those types of things, those are yours, and I will help you work through them and those types of things. So it's an interesting way to do it. I think I like her use of the primary and secondary relationship as it's dealing with the challenges, because I think, again, often in healthcare, we get into healthcare to help people, right? And we get into healthcare. My background's in social work. I want to help reduce people's burdens. That's really what I like. But I have to look at, am I doing it in an empowering kind of way? And it's no different when you're coaching teams. I want to empower this team to face their challenge. I don't want to take their challenge on. So let's look at the attitudes involved in this responsibility model. So some of these attitudes are that the coach wants to empower the team to develop their own approach rather than simply adopting that of the coach. If I try to approach this in a responsibility model, one of the things that I like to keep in my pocket is if I empower them to develop their own, I learn from them. They actually add to my toolkit then. Where if I just simply go through and tell everyone that a foot exam poster won't work, so don't start there, I'm not learning a thing. All I'm doing is spreading what I got. If they're saying, well, we don't really want to do a foot exam poster, but we might want to do it this way, there might be something I can learn out of that. And I think that's a much different attitude about what we're doing today. The other ones are the coach understands that the team has to live with the results of their decisions. And I think this gets back to, what's keeping you up at night. And if what's keeping you up tonight is, the reaction or the consequence of the decisions that were made in that practice today, then I would argue that the practice isn't owning them. I think the coach is. And so I think you have to look at that the coach has to understand and have the attitude that the team lives with the results of their own decisions. Therefore, if we have to wait 4 months to understand that the foot exam posters don't work, then that's fine. We're going to learn a lot in that process. And I think that, there's nothing wrong with that, and I need to understand that they own that decision. The other thing is the coach must accept that good enough. I think this is my favorite one. So if there's one little piece you take out of this whole thing, it's this. The coach must accept that good enough and highly committed by the team is way better than outstanding by the coach. This is my favorite one. Good enough and highly committed by the team is better than outstanding by the coach. This one is hard to swallow if you are good at going into practices and coaching. But it's so true. If this practice really, I keep picking on these foot exam posters, but it's just a real easy example to put in there. If this practice is so behind these foot exam posters and they really want to do it, then them trying that and being committed to it is so much better than me saying, oh, go in, do this, do this, do this, and this will improve. And so, I think it's, to me, I love this mantra. My colleague Neil Baker, who did the first model with me, has this saying that he says that the informed pessimist will always outdo the uninformed optimist. And I think these little sayings are so important because this saying of good enough and highly committed by the team is better than outstanding by the coach is so true. And I think that it really, these are the things that we have to keep inside and build in our own attitudes to make this really work. So, and the last one is that the focus must be on the strengths of the team and not the strengths of the coach. So I'm good at facilitating meetings. And so if we want to meet about this, I can really facilitate the heck out of that meeting. But if those meetings don't work for this team, then I need to put that skill set aside and work on what helps them. And I think that that's a key piece in all of this, is that it has to be me coaching them on how to facilitate meetings when meetings aren't really going to get things done for this practice. This isn't the kind of practice who wants to run meetings and those types of things. It really doesn't line up that way. I have to be flexible enough as a coach to really focus on what are the strengths of this team, what do they bring to this, and then how can we build off of that? And again, I drop back to what can I learn from them and that's what makes it much more of their responsibility. They own the process. So some of the behaviors then, when you're coaching, that really develop this responsibility piece is that the coach stimulates the team's thinking so they know their own position on an issue or problem. And this is sometimes hard, and if you're in a dual role like a lot of you are, this might be even harder. That the team has its own position that is or is not mine. I mean, it has nothing to do, it has no relation to my position on a key problem or issue. And I think the next one is the coach aggressively seeks opportunities to invite the team to be decisive and to articulate and or document their decisions. I think, to me, this is so important because this articulating and documentation of their decisions has to be key going through, because otherwise you'll find, I find anyways, that as the coach, I remember decisions that were made, but they either don't remember them or have moved on, and nobody has anything to refer back to. And so I think it's important to really this is where meeting minutes and those types of things come in really handy, because I think otherwise they're relying on you as a coach as basically their memory bank, and we can't have that. The coach encourages the team to stay connected to the challenge and to own their own challenge and the success in overcoming it. I think that's the other thing, that if you rescue this practice, if you're really sheltering them from facing their own challenges, and if you're taking too much on, then you have to keep in mind that you're taking the success away from them too. That, if I'm jumping in and saying, oh, no, don't do that, work on this over here, this always gets better improvement and things like that, then sure, maybe they can have some success in my idea worked. But that's not nearly as empowering as knowing that their own idea worked. And so I think, keep that in mind, that if you are rescuing or doing things for them, then you're taking away the success too. So just in the last couple minutes of just wrapping up this model, I thought I would give some examples of how in the AHEC program we've used this to talk with our coaches about the fact that we will operate off of a responsibility model. And my biggest thing in doing this with the coaches in the AHEC program is I need them to know that they can say no. I need them to know that if we're working in a practice and the practice asks us to do something, I need them to be able to assess and see that, that that's not in this responsibility model, that that's not empowering to the practice, that that's taking on too much, and I feel like I'm rescuing, and therefore I'm going to say no. And that's hard to do. So what we've built in and said, okay, in AHEC's responsibility model of coaching, we have said that we will provide effective strategies to meet the challenges facing the practices. That we will help to assess the needs in selecting vendor products and other tools to meet the challenges. Notice that it says assess the needs and that we won't necessarily select your product. That we will support the implementation process, including individualized and on-site consultation, including team facilitation, but we will not implement it for you. We will consult on practice workflow redesign to achieve EHR implementation, meaningful use, improve clinical outcomes. We'll analyze the practice using data review. CADIS is one of our own internal assessment tools. PCMH application, meaningful use, gap analysis. So we'll work with the practice. We'll, conduct all of these assessments and those types of things to help the practice understand where they are. We'll assist in training and tools that are available. We will provide on-site visits and telephones and webinars and interactions and those types of things. Here are some examples of things that are not in our responsibility model. Independently or directly accessing software programs or applications. This includes and is not limited to performing system configuration, building clinical content, setup, or application support, meaning it's not our job to get your EHR ready to go for Go Live Day. Serving as an authorized agent between the practice and the vendors, or between the practice and corporate leadership. And this is a sticky situation, and this is something that you all might feel too, even if you're internal, that because you're the one facilitating change, you're the one coaching change, and then the practice decides that they want to try this change, and everybody agrees on it, and you start to set up the PDSA, and you might get corporate leadership that says, no, we won't change that way. We won't be able to do it. And then I think sometimes they expect you to act upon on their behalf. And especially for AHEC as an outside organization, that really doesn't work well. So that is not in our responsibility model. We won't do that with you. Delivering EHR application-specific training, involving in-practice administration, involvement in practice administration or staff-related issues. Again, that's not what we're there to. We're there to coach change. We're not there to fix your HR issues. Installing and supporting and managing IT resources, pulling and gathering or entering data in non-AHEC related systems on behalf of the practice, so we will not attest for you for meaningful use, and those types of things. So again, what we've done is work with our staff, gone through the difference between rescuing practices and building this client responsibility model. And then we've outlined some things that are not in our model so that they understand that they are allowed to say no to some of these things. And again, not because we can't do these things. I think professionally we have the skills to do these things, but this is doing for. This is not empowering so that you can learn to do this on your own and go forward. And we need to make sure that we are always working to empower the practices we're working with. So I thought we would take just a little bit to talk about some of the challenges of coaching with the responsibility model, especially in the situations that you all are facing out in the organizations that you work in. So what do you think is the challenge to implementing, to really using this responsibility model instead of jumping in there to rescue?
I think from my perspective, it's, what you've been talking about is setting expectations, and I think that's very important, but sometimes what my expectations are different than those of my counterparts, and we find a lot that people at least in the state health department bureaucracy at this point are so beaten down by the system and the processes of the system that they just want to be told what to do and when to do it, and it's hard to kind of draw them out of that. So that's one of the problems with trying to follow this responsibility model, which by the way I agree with.
That's a great point, Drew, in that they want to be rescued.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that makes it even more challenging. Yeah.
And this is Arnett, and I think sometimes with the nature of our work, it's just easier to go in and do it or tell them what to do as opposed to coaching them into what to do. A lot of times the staff may be at a site where they may need information immediately. So sometimes we feel that we don't always have the time to coach them into what the answer is or what they need to do in a particular situation.
Oh, that's a great point. So really the time frame that you have might make the responsibility model more challenging.
I think so, yes. Not to say that we shouldn't do it, but I just think it's easier for us to just do it and then go on to the next step. And one thing I was going to ask is, I don't know if this session was being taped or if there's a way that we can go back and listen to it again, because I would like to do that and actually share it with some of my other managers I have on staff.
Arnett, sorry to interrupt. This is Claire. We are recording it, so
Okay.
We'll send it out in the follow-up as per usual.
Okay, great.
Well, Arnett, I think you have a really good point about the time frame. That sometimes because of the time crunch, it's easier to just jump in and rescue them. But one of the things that I think we need to really look at, and sometimes it's hard to take the time to step back and look at it too, is, you know, if you have to jump in and rescue them today because of this time frame, and I'm just going to, you know, do this for them because we're in a crunch, then that means that the next time something similar to this comes up, you're going to have to do it again because we didn't take the time to coach them through it.
And you're absolutely right, and that's what happens.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we don't put that into our, I guess we don't compute that, the length of time in all of that when we don't add them together.
Yes.
But I think that that's interesting. But that is, I mean, those are some of the external pressures that move us into that rescue mode.
Hey, Ann, this is Elizabeth in North Carolina, and I was thinking about how sometimes when you're working within your own organization and there's some pressure possibly from leadership to get a task done, and you've tried multiple times with the coaching behaviors and really worked with a group, I'm sorry, I meant to say with the responsibility behaviors, and then get to a point where it's sort of come down to it and the task has to get done, and then you end up doing the rescuing behavior of like just doing it. It sets you up in a weird way for the next time. Do you have any thoughts about managing that type of situation?
You know, I think it's interesting, and unfortunately, I don't think what you're describing is uncommon. So, you're on this path, and you've done things nicely to get the team to make their own decisions and those types of things. But it does take a little bit longer, or it may take a little bit longer. I don't know. And then if you have to kind of throw that out the window because you know I got a call at 7 o'clock tonight, and the decision needed to be made, you know. So I guess whether that impacts, I still think that your team is better off for knowing the part of the process that you did well. And so you get up tomorrow morning and you start again and ground it in the responsibility model again. So, I mean, I think, you know, because part of it is learning the process. And so I go back to these, I'm going to make you all dizzy for a minute here, but I go back to you know, to these pictures in that, you know, I don't think anything is ever finite. So I think it's continually striving to be at this one, to continually strive to make it their challenge. But I don't think anything is lost if you have to drop back, if there, for whatever reason, you know, all right, we tried, but this one has to be rescued, and then we're going to, you know, get back on the horse and work back towards having this triangle go in the right direction.
Thanks for that. That gives me some new ideas to think about.
Yeah, the other thing, and this is where I'm talking more than I want to, but the other thing that I think is interesting is some of the things that we talked about with these two models today. There's different levels of application to this, right? So one level as a coach is I take everything that was said on the call today and I absorb it. And then I internalize it and I apply it to my coaching. And that's a great way to handle the information on today's call. And then there's probably this next step to that in taking this information, internalizing it, applying it to what I'm doing. But in certain situations, I may want to make my team aware of what I'm doing. So in the instance where you felt like you were building it up and you were moving along nicely, and then boom, you had to jump in and rescue it, and you didn't have the time to finish it in that nice responsibility model where they could have the success in it and those types of things, depending on your personality and where you are with your coaching and those types of things, you may want to then pull this model out and show them what you were trying to do, what you then had to do, but what you're now going to get back to trying to do with the responsibility model. And so I always consider this my bag of tricks. So in my bag of tricks, I have this client responsibility model. In my bag of tricks, I have this these bubbles that we talked about earlier. We really need to come up with a name for this model. We haven't really done that. But so I have these two things in my bag of tricks now. Whether I reveal those to the practice or not, or to my team or not, is up to me. But that is one way to address it. If it didn't go the way you wanted it to go, you can kind of show them what you were trying to do and why you had to do it differently.
That sounds like a really good way to approach it when the person who's the coach is also part of the team and shares the team's challenge. I was looking at your triangle slide that you had up with the primary and secondary lines just a minute ago. Yeah, that one. And I think sometimes those roles for us working within our primary workplace, like instead of kind of in a consulting model or like a role where you go into lots of different practices, if you're always, working in the same basic setting, sometimes it's a little less clear the division between who's coaching and the team and whose the challenge is, that kind of thing. So that's helpful.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so in the coaches that I teach with IHI, we teach this year-long course, and we end up carrying a big distinction between internal coaching and external coaching. Mm-hmm. And there's definitely pros and cons to both. A con to internal coaching is, today I'm your boss and tomorrow I'm the coach. Or today, I'm going to have to make an executive decision on this, and tomorrow we're going to get together as a team and I'm going to help empower you to make this decision. And so, again, you have to constantly go in and out of those things. The pro side of being the internal person coaching the team is that you are very aware of the personalities and politics that you're dealing with. And that's something, so as AHEC, when we go in to coach a team, we go in blind. We don't know, we don't know that, Susie really didn't want to be on this team and someone made her, and so now she's going to be passive-aggressive for the next 6 months until I figure out what's going on here. We don't know the politics in it. Sometimes we don't know the internal pressures that have been put on the team. We eventually uncover them all and figure this out because we work closely with them. But so those are some of the advantages to being internal, is that what sometimes especially in the front end of this work, takes us a while to figure out as external coaches. Sometimes you all come in knowing that and don't have to have some of the, I don't want to call it wasted work because it's definitely a learning environment, but, there are things that you can kind of skip right to. Sometimes it's nice to be naive to those things, too. Sometimes there's a lot of good things that come out of, me being blissfully ignorant to the fact that Susie's passive-aggressive and it doesn't seem to be affecting the team, so let's just move on. So there's definitely pros and cons in it.
This is Marcia, and kind of to build on that same thing, if you're in the role of coach and you have to, you're internal, and so you do have to drop back because you happen to be the person who is going to get nailed if the decision is not made, but you've been working with a team and they have made great progress. What I find myself doing as a supervisor, but also in a position where I have the opportunity to coach, is that continuum that you showed where you've got the doing for on the left-hand side and then the coaching all the way over on the right-hand side, that one. I find myself dropping back, and yes, I had to go make that decision, but then I can use that as an opportunity for consulting and training, which then helps me facilitate that team in moving toward being able to function, capitalize on the good things that they did and the positive things that they did, and try to encourage them to build on those things and maybe move a little faster than they did, even though they were going in the right direction. So I kind of find myself wandering around that continuum when I'm put in those situations.
Well, I think that's a good point, and I don't know, but it seems to me like that's very appropriate. You know, like that's a great way to look at it, and maybe that's a way to, I don't know, like legitimize kind of what we're doing. Like, you know, okay, well, I had to make this decision, and so I dropped back over here to this bubble of I did it for him because I had to. And, you know, that doesn't affect how I do things going forward. It's just the situation that we had right there. I think that's great. So are there any things you can think of that you might do differently now? And this is hard and throwing this at you, but, you know, anybody willing to kind of think about taking these two models, and do you think you have any changes you want to make?
And this is Claire. Just sitting here and thinking about this, awesome presentation and information, definitely. Something that I can actually do for me is when you listed out the kind of what you will do, what you won't do for your teams, I think it'll be helpful for me in empowering the teams instead of me going in and rescuing them all the time, because I feel like that's what I tend to do when they're learning. Is sitting down and writing before I really get into the depths of it and saying, okay, I will do this, I will do this, I will do this, kind of in scope, out of scope, would be extremely helpful exercise for me to do consciously and set aside time to think about. So I thought that was really neat.
Well, you know, you bring up a great point, and actually I did a little emergency call to Greg yesterday afternoon because I was like, there's so many different models that I want to talk about, and I don't know how many to cram in here, and he actually held me back to 2, so I'll just let y'all know I think it was good. Good for the call today. But one of the things that really helps with that, and in my work with IHI, what we do is we go on then and tie this into contracting. Because that's the next piece in this, really, is contracting, and contracting doesn't have to be a formal document. It doesn't have to be a legal draw up. I would argue that contracting can be an agenda. We're going to have this agenda for this meeting. Here's what I'm going to do on the agenda. I'm going to do the things that have my name by them. Contracting can also be minutes from that meeting, saying, you know, Ann said she would follow up with doing this. That's a contract. So thinking of contracting in an informal type of way, if you're in behavioral health, like I said earlier, I'm an MSW. We do informal contracts all the time, verbal contracts with patients, and it's the same type of thing with basically any time that I say, you know, that I will do something, that's a contract. But you can lay it out so that you develop your skills in your verbal contracting or your informal contracting so that you develop your skills around this responsibility model. So that you're setting yourself up in a way to be very clear about, you know, what you will do, and then if you get really good at it, you can do why you will do those things, which may help them to see that you're helping them help themselves which my teenagers love it when I do that. But I think that's what we all do every day is kind of help, whether it's a patient you're working with in self-management or whether it's, your children. I mean, that's what we're trying to do is get that behavior change in there, right? And so the same thing with the team. You may want to be explicit in your verbal contract with them to really align with that responsibility model, and then you could even explain to them what you're not going to do to make sure that you stay away from rescuing.
Right. Mhm.
So, anything else on this? I think I have one more slide. Just the resources for today's call. This is Mary Beth O'Neill's book. It's a very small book. It's Executive Coaching with Backbone and Heart. Like I said, she's not directly tied to healthcare, but it's really good coaching materials. And then the model that I left out, Greg told me to go ahead and put it in here so that if you all wanted to look into it, you could. The model that I left out today, that if you're interested at a future topic, is really looking at this practice of adaptive leadership by Ronald Heifetz. He is the king in his field of organizational development. I just learned about him several years ago and have really taken on his things. He still speaks all around the country, so you may get him at a conference or something. But he talks a lot about adaptive and technical changes and then really making sure you have the right tension for change in your organization. And so I couldn't figure out a way to mash this all in here, so I stuck with the two models that we talked about today. But if you're interested in going further, I would recommend looking into Heifetz. So that's all I have for today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Anne. We really appreciate it.